The sun beat down hard on Perdition Creek, baking the dust until it curled and cracked like old skin. Flies buzzed around the gallows at the edge of town, circling the wooden beam as if they knew what was coming. A dog barked in the distance, then went silent. Even the wind held its breath. Clara stood barefoot in the dirt, a frayed rope already coiled around her small, bruised wrists. Her dress, once pink, was now the color of ash and blood, torn in places that showed the pale angles of her ribs. Her eyes, wide gray and desperate, scanned the faces of the crowd, but found no mercy there. Just tight mouths, cruel smirks, and the kind of hunger that had nothing to do with bread. She hadn't meant to steal it. The loaf had sat there in the window of the general store like a promise, fresh and golden, steam still curling from its crust. She'd watched it for 3 days. On the 4th, her hunger burned hotter than her fear. A heavy hand had grabbed her arm before she cleared the threshold. The sheriff hadn't even let her speak. Said the town had rules. Said the gallows were built for a reason. Now, Sheriff Durling stood beside the noose, chewing a toothpick, his hat pulled low against the sun. He was a man of size and silence, but his eyes glinted whenever he saw someone squirm. Clara didn't cry. Not anymore. Not since the fire took her family, and the bandits took what was left. "You all know what this is," Durling called, voice flat and dry as gravel. "You steal, you swing." The crowd murmured in agreement. Men with whiskey on their breath. Women clinging to their children like Clara was the devil herself. A few boys jeered, kicking up dust and hoping for a better view. Clara lifted her chin, though her legs trembled. She wouldn't beg. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction. The sheriff jerked his thumb at the hangman, a gaunt man with a scar across his throat and eyes that never blinked. He stepped forward, tightening the rope above her head. Then a voice rang out. "Hold it." It was rough, low, and quiet, yet somehow cut through the air like a bullet. The crowd turned. A man stepped out of the shadow of the mercantile, leaning heavily on a gnarled cane. His boots dragged slightly in the dust, one leg stiff with each step. He wore a long duster that had seen better years, the collar turned up against the wind. A thick gray beard covered his jaw, and his hat sat low enough to shade a pair of eyes that burned with something older than rage, or maybe older than sorrow. No one spoke. No one moved. Even Durling hesitated. The stranger walked up to the gallows, slow but unflinching. He looked up at Clara. She looked back, confused but silent. Then he turned to the sheriff. "She's with me now." Durling squinted. "Ain't seen you around here in years, Briggs." The name moved through the crowd like a shiver. Silas Briggs. Some said he used to be a lawman. Some said a bounty hunter. Others said he died in the mountains long ago, eaten by wolves or shot by some outlaw he'd chased too far. But here he was, alive and solid as stone. "She stole from a store," Durling said. "Law's clear." Silas tapped the cane once against the gallows post. "The law ain't nothing without a man behind it who knows justice. You hang a starving girl for bread, that ain't law. That's cowardice." Someone coughed. The hangman stepped back. "She broke the rules," Durling muttered, voice thinning under the weight of the moment. Silas looked around at the faces watching. "Which of you ain't stolen something? Time. A drink. A look that wasn't yours to take." "She took bread. Bread to live." Clara stared at him. This stranger. This broken old man with thunder in his voice. "She's with me," he repeated, softer now, but firmer. "You got a problem with that. I'll be out at the edge of Dustbone Ridge. I'll be waiting." Durling didn't speak. No one did. Silas stepped forward and gently unbound Clara's wrists. His fingers were rough, but careful, like someone who hadn't touched kindness in a long time but remembered how. "You got a name?" he asked her. She nodded slowly. "Clara." "Well, Clara," he said, handing her the bread that someone must have dropped in the dirt. "You just got yourself a second chance. Don't waste it." They walked away, side by side, down the main street of Perdition Creek. The crowd parted like tall grass in the wind. No one dared stop them. Behind them, the gallows stood empty. And in the silence that followed, it was not the law that lingered in the air, but something that smelled faintly, impossibly, like hope. Silas Briggs walked like thunder rolling slow across the prairie, uneven, deliberate, and impossible to ignore. Dust clung to his boots, the limp in his right leg more pronounced as he climbed the slope beyond Perdition Creek. Clara kept pace beside him, clutching the loaf of bread tight against her chest, like it might vanish if she blinked. They reached a small rise, where the land flattened into a ledge of sunburned earth. A crumbling shack crouched there, built from warped pine and old tin, its porch bowed like the back of a tired mule. Silas unlocked the door with a rusty key and motioned her inside. It was no home, not really. Just four walls, a cot, a blackened stove, and a rocking chair with one arm missing. A rifle rested against the corner, dust thick on every surface. But it had a roof, and the air inside smelled of smoke and leather, not death. "You can sleep there," Silas said, nodding toward the cot. "Ain't much, but the wind won't claw at you." Clara stood near the door, her thin frame casting a shadow longer than she was tall. "Why'd you do it?" she asked softly. "Why stop them?" Silas lowered himself into the rocker and stared through the warped window glass. The town sprawled below, like a cluster of rusted nails stuck in the dirt. He said nothing for a long time. "Because once," he muttered at last, "someone saved me." She didn't ask more. The words hung in the air like smoke that refused to clear. She settled onto the edge of the cot, tucking the bread beside her like a sleeping pet, and rested her head against the wall. Silas watched her out of the corner of his eye. Too thin, too quiet, a child hardened into something brittle. He remembered what that felt like. Years ago, he had ridden in a different saddle, the 10-star pinned to his chest, shining like hope. Marshal Silas Briggs. Back then, his spine had been straighter, his leg not yet full of shrapnel. He and two other deputies had been tracking a wagon train of smugglers through the Red Rock Gorge when it all went to hell. The ambush was clean and silent. 2 shots, both deputies down. Silas took one in the thigh and another in the side. He remembered the taste of blood and the smell of burning sage. He remembered crawling through the rocks as the smugglers took everything but his life. He remembered who set them on him, too. Sheriff Durling. It hadn't been personal, just politics and greed. Durling took his badge after they buried Silas's name in an unmarked grave and left him for dead. But the earth didn't keep him. Thunder doesn't die easy. He leaned forward, the wood creaking beneath him, and pulled a battered pouch from his coat. He unrolled it slowly. Inside were small tools, oiled cloth, and a Colt revolver that gleamed despite the age. "Your hands steady?" he asked. Clara blinked. "Why? I figure folks'll come looking for that bread. And worse. I thought you were just taking me in." "I am," he said, "but I ain't letting you stay soft." He taught her how to clean the pistol that night. Her fingers were clumsy, but her eyes were sharp. She didn't flinch at the weight of the iron or the smell of the oil. When she pulled the trigger on an empty chamber, her hands didn't shake. By dawn, the first riders came. Dust trails rose over the eastern ridge like smoke signals, and with them, news rode faster than hooves. A trader brought the word from the canyon pass. 6 bodies found gutted and hung like game. No one left alive. No one but the man who told the tale, and he rode with a broken arm and eyes wide as silver dollars. The Grady butchers were coming. Jeb Grady and his kin were more rumor than men, known for carving out towns and leaving them hollow as shells. They traveled light, struck fast, and stayed long enough to poison the well with fear. They didn't rob. They erased. And Perdition Creek sat square in their path. The town stirred like a nest of hornets. Meetings in the chapel. Men arming themselves with rusted rifles and shaking hands. Durling made speeches, full of noise but hollow at the core. By noon, a boy was sent up to the shack with a message. The townsfolk wanted Clara gone. Said she brought the butchers down like a curse, like sickness. Said they'd never had trouble until she showed her face. The boy stammered and sweated, waiting for Silas to strike him or shout. Instead, Silas only leaned close and said, "Tell your folks they got 2 choices. Let her stay, or let me leave with her. But if they try to take her, they best be ready to bury more than just shame." The boy ran so fast he dropped his satchel. Clara sat on the porch that night, staring at the sky, knees drawn to her chest. I heard them, she said. They called me filth. Called me death. You ain't either, Silas said, whittling something with his knife. Why are they so afraid? Because fear's easier than guilt. She looked at him. You were like them once. He stopped carving, then nodded slowly. Worse. I stood by while men hanged a boy who didn't do nothing. I told myself it was the law. Later, I found out the truth. But it was too late. They gave me a badge that day, called me a man. I ain't been proud of it since. Is that why you limp? No. That came after, he said, eyes distant. The limp's just a reminder. They sat in silence a while longer. The stars blinked above them, cold and watching. Silas stood and went inside, returning with a small blanket. He draped it over her shoulders, without a word. I can learn, she said, voice barely a whisper. If you teach me. I know, he replied. That's why I'm still here. Far below, Perdition Creek slept uneasy. The church bell rang once at midnight, though no one pulled the rope. And beyond the hills, the butchers rode closer with every mile, sharpening their knives and tasting the wind. In the broken shack on the ridge, a girl and an old gunslinger sat wrapped in silence, steel, and the kind of fire that no gang could smother. The wind blew hot, and dry the morning the Grady butchers rode into Perdition Creek. Dust rose before them like an omen, swirling behind 20 men who looked more like revenants than riders. They came fast, hooves tearing through the hardpan, guns slung loose, and eyes hungry. The townsfolk saw them from the edge of the church steeple, and in that moment, all hope seemed to shrink. At the front of the pack rode Jeb Grady, a tall man with a long black duster and a face like bleached leather. His eyes were pale and green, flat as stones in a creek, the kind of eyes that didn't blink when a man begged. They called him the Rattler, not just for the bite, but because you could hear the danger coming long before you ever saw it. And when you did, it was already too late. The butchers didn't stop at the edge of town. They rolled through the main road like it belonged to them, because it did now. Jeb pulled up in front of the sheriff's office, his horse snorting, lathered in sweat. Sheriff Durling stepped outside with his hat in hand, his badge catching the sun like a lie that wanted to be believed. You know who we are, Jeb said, quiet enough that a man had to lean in to hear. Durling nodded. Everyone west of the Black Ridge knows the Grady butchers. Jeb smiled, showing yellow teeth and a crack in his front incisor. Good. Saves us all some time. They dismounted like they'd practiced it, a dance of menace, every step measured, eyes scanning for weakness. No one moved to stop them. Shop doors were locked, curtains drawn, children pulled back by trembling hands. In 10 minutes, Perdition Creek belonged to the butchers. Jeb laid down his terms: food, water, whiskey, horses, silence. No questions, no resistance. Anyone who didn't comply got buried, and they wouldn't bother with prayers. Durling agreed too fast. Of course. Whatever you need. I'll hold you to that, Jeb said, patting the sheriff's cheek like a favorite hound. You're a smart man. Across town, Clara and Silas watched from the ridge. She sat still beside him, but her breathing changed when she spotted the rider near the back. Thick neck, a broken nose, and a strange patch of silver hair at his temple. He dismounted with a casual swing of his leg and laughed as he kicked over a barrel of flour. Clara's face paled. Her fingers curled into fists. That one, with the scar on his throat. You know him. He was there, she whispered, when they killed my family. I saw him cut my brother's throat. He laughed. He laughed the same way. Silas didn't speak. He stared at the man for a long moment, then looked at Clara. Her jaw trembled, but she didn't cry. She hadn't since the noose. You sure you're ready for what comes next? He asked. No, she said, but I'll do it anyway. That night, while the butchers drank and hollered in the saloon, Silas and Clara laid their traps. Oil tins buried beneath boards. Wire stretched tight between buildings. Rifles placed at vantage points. Silas moved slow but certain, his limp forgotten in the purpose of it all. Clara followed his lead, learning fast, absorbing everything. He taught her where to shoot and when not to, how to move in the dark, how to breathe past fear and see-through noise. They practiced reloads by candlelight. They whispered code words. They scouted rooftops and alley shadows. She asked questions, and he answered, more now than ever before. One evening, after hours of silence and steel, Clara leaned her rifle against the wall and asked the thing that had been building in her chest, "Were you always like this?" Silas looked up from the map. He was drawing in the dirt. Like what? Ready. Prepared. Dangerous. He chuckled, but there was no humor in it. I was a lawman. Back before Durling wore a badge. Rode for the marshal's office out of Broken Mesa. Her eyes widened. You were a marshal. He nodded once. Till I found out the men above me were running guns to the same outlaws we were hunting. Said I could join in or vanish. She sat beside him in the dust. What did you choose? I chose to speak. They chose to shoot. He tapped the cane beside him. Got a bullet in my back and a knife in my gut. Woke up 3 days later under a tarp. Crawled through sagebrush till my hands bled. Haven't worn a star since. Clara looked down. And now you're here. Saving me. You think it's about you? He asked gently. I'm just settling old debts. They tried to bury me, Clara. Now I bury what they send. She didn't know what to say. Instead, she pulled her knees to her chest and stared into the fire. I feel like it's my fault they're here. Like I brought them down on this town. Silas exhaled slowly. You didn't bring them. You just lit a fire in a place that was already soaked in oil. If it wasn't you, it'd have been someone else. But I saw him, she whispered. The man who killed my brother. I see his face when I close my eyes. Silas put his hand on her shoulder. Then we aimed to make sure he never laughs again. Her breath hitched. Her voice broke. What if I can't do it? What if I freeze? You won't. And if you do, I'll be there. A long silence passed. Then she asked, Why me? Why are you doing this for me? He looked at her like he was seeing something deeper than flesh and blood. Because a long time ago, I needed someone to believe in me. Nobody did. But you deserve a chance. The next morning, the townspeople found letters slipped under their doors. Messages scrawled in Silas's neat, sharp hand. If you want your town back, stand up. If not, stay quiet and live in chains. Some wept. Some packed to flee. A few cleaned their guns and kissed their wives goodbye. By afternoon, the town buzzed with a different kind of fear. Not of the butchers, but of the man on the ridge with a dead man's stare and a girl beside him who carried a rifle like it belonged to her. In the saloon, Jeb Grady heard the whispers. He listened, amused, as townsfolk stumbled over Silas's name like a curse too old to speak. So they got a cripple and a child to save them. Jeb said, spitting into the sawdust, This'll be over before the whiskey's gone. He raised his glass to his men. Let the old ghost try. Ain't nothing we haven't buried before. But when the sun dipped below the horizon that night, the shadows stretched longer than they should have. And somewhere just outside the town, a trap was waiting to be sprung by wolves too full of pride to smell the danger. Inside that trap stood a limping man with thunder in his voice, and a girl who had learned not just to fight, but to survive. Night settled over Perdition Creek like a veil soaked in blood. The wind died. The moon shrank behind clouds, and the town grew still, quiet in the way a church gets before the first shovel of dirt hits the coffin. Shadows stretched long and deeper than they should, curling under porches and rooftops like waiting serpents. Silas moved through the gloom, like a man half-born of it. His limp was more pronounced, his breathing shallower, but his eyes remained sharp, alive. One by one, he checked the traps, nail boards hidden under loose planks, oil barrels primed to spill and spark, lanterns left hanging by frayed cords above the alley choke points. A town with no army could still become a weapon in the right hands. Clara followed close, rifle slung tight across her chest, her jaw set and steady. Her cheeks were streaked with soot, hair tied back in a makeshift knot. She had stopped trembling 2 days ago. Now she moved with the quiet certainty of someone who had decided not just to survive, but to fight. You sure about this? Silas asked, pausing beneath the blacksmith's awning. The iron smell of old horseshoes mixed with oil and sweat. I'm not leaving, Clara said. Not while they're still breathing. Silas nodded slowly. There was pride in his eyes, but something more, fear, maybe, or grief. He placed a hand on her shoulder and squeezed. You got a good shot, and you're smart, he said. But here's what they don't teach you in books or sermons. It ain't about the fastest draw. It's about the truest heart. She looked at him, confused. You hesitate when you're angry, he continued. But when your reason's pure, when it's love or justice or something stronger, you don't flinch. That's when you win. She didn't respond. She just nodded once, and they moved on. By midnight, Perdition Creek held its breath. The streets were dark, windows boarded, silence deep enough to muffle prayers. Somewhere near the well, a dog barked once, and then nothing. The butchers came with fire. Explosions shattered the stillness, barrels erupting in flame as they rode in from three sides. Bullets whined like hornets. Townsfolk ducked behind overturned wagons, fired wild and prayed harder. Smoke curled through the alleys, thick and blinding. Silas and Clara took position atop the mercantile, their rifles trained on the saloon, where Jeb's men had set up their stronghold. A rider charged down Main Street. Silas waited, eyes squinting through smoke, then fired. The rider fell without a sound, his horse rearing and bolting into the dark. Another came, this one ducking and weaving. Clara steadied her rifle. Her breathing slowed. She squeezed the trigger. The man pitched sideways, his gun clattering across the dust. Good shot, Silas muttered. Then came the scream. Someone had hit a nail trap by the church steps. A chain reaction followed. Shots fired from second-story windows. Buckets of oil poured and lit. Men ran screaming, their coats on fire. From the shadows beneath the stable, Silas moved faster than anyone expected. With a flick, he dropped his cane and drew the sawed-off shotgun hidden inside the shaft. The blast echoed like thunder. One butcher hit the dirt and didn't rise. Another turned too late. Clara fired from the rooftop and took him through the collarbone. She didn't look away. Chaos swirled around them, but Clara focused on Silas, matching his steps, covering his blind spots. He barked orders. She followed. He reloaded. She handed shells. Smoke stung their eyes, but the world had narrowed to purpose. Suddenly, a rifle cracked from behind the saloon. Silas grunted and dropped to one knee. Silas! Clara cried. He waved her off, but blood darkened his coat. A shoulder hit. Then a scream tore through the air. One of the butchers was making a run straight at him. Clara didn't think. She raised her rifle, sighted him, and pulled the trigger. The man spun and crumpled in the dirt, lifeless. Silas looked up, blinking at her through the haze. You saved me. I owed you one, she said, chest heaving. The gunfire slowed. Bodies littered the streets. The butchers were breaking. Some fled into the hills. Others dropped their weapons. Only Jeb Grady remained. He stepped into the center of Main Street, like death in human form, his pistol low. A smile curled across his cracked lips. You think you won, he said, voice raw. You think killing my boys makes you heroes? Clara stood on the steps of the mercantile, rifle raised. Put it down, Jeb. He looked at her, and for the first time, she saw something flicker in those snake-green eyes, recognition, and then laughter. You, he said, the little whelp from Cedar Glen. I remember your face. You were crying like a kicked pup. Clara didn't blink. Jeb raised his revolver. Too fast. Silas moved like lightning, stepping between Clara and the bullet. The gunshot cracked through the still air, and Silas staggered, then dropped to his knees. Clara screamed. Jeb raised his gun again, but Silas was still breathing. Barely. He looked up at her, eyes fierce. My coat, he rasped. She dropped beside him, reached into his coat pocket, and felt the cold steel of a hidden derringer. Her fingers wrapped around it. Jeb didn't expect it. She rose as he took his second shot. It missed wide. She pulled the trigger. The derringer bucked in her hand. Jeb staggered back, a red bloom on his chest. He looked down in disbelief, took one step, then collapsed face first in the dust. The silence that followed was deafening. Smoke drifted lazily. The fire had died. The town lay broken and bloodstained, but free. Clara dropped the pistol and fell to her knees beside Silas. He was coughing, blood in the corner of his mouth. "No, no, no," she whispered, pressing her hands to his side. "Stay with me." He looked at her, his voice barely audible. "You did good. Real good. You're gonna be okay," she lied. He closed his eyes. "Told you, truest heart always wins." She pressed her forehead to his and held on, and from the rooftops and windows, the people of Perdition Creek came out, slow and quiet, staring at the girl in the dirt, cradling the man who had once been forgotten, until Thunder returned and walked beside them. The sun rose slowly over Perdition Creek, bleeding light across scorched earth and blood-stained streets. Smoke curled in lazy trails from broken windows. The echoes of gunfire had faded, but they lived on in the faces of those who remained, quiet, humbled, forever marked. In the center of it all, the old shack on the ridge still stood, and in its shadow, so did the man they thought was broken. Silas Briggs lay still for 3 days. Clara stayed by his side, cleaning the wound, changing bandages, forcing broth past his cracked lips. She slept in the rocking chair with a rifle across her lap, flinching at every sound, every creak of the wind. The town sent what little it could, clean linens, food, even a bottle of whiskey from Durling. But none of it mattered like the quiet strength she poured into him hour by hour. He woke on the 4th morning with a breath that rattled like gravel in his chest and eyes that burned steady beneath his weathered brow. "You're still here," he rasped. "Of course," Clara said, voice tight with relief. "You think I'd let you die after all this?" He smiled, lopsided, full of pain and pride, still stubborn. She squeezed his hand. "You taught me." Word of their stand traveled faster than the butchers had ever ridden. Within days, folks from nearby towns arrived with stories of what had happened, how Perdition Creek had been saved by a girl with steady hands and a crippled man with thunder in his bones. Some came to see the gallows where Clara was almost hanged. Others came just to shake Silas's hand. On the 7th day, Sheriff Durling knocked on the door of the shack with his hat in both hands. He stepped inside and cleared his throat like a schoolboy. "We owe you," he said plainly. "All of us." Silas didn't answer. He sat propped up against the wall, color returning to his face by inches. Durling held out a badge. "I know it ain't much, but it's yours if you want it. Town could use a real lawman again." Silas stared at the tin star, its surface dulled by time and shame. "Justice don't wear a badge," he said. "It rides in the heart. You want to make things right? Start with the weak. Feed the hungry. Listen more than you talk." Durling nodded once, shame thick in his throat, and walked out without another word. Life returned slowly to Perdition Creek. Like a field after fire, green shoots began to push through. The saloon stayed quiet. The church filled. Men fixed broken fences, and women planted flowers where the bodies had once fallen. Clara stayed. She took up the blacksmith shop down by the stable. The forge had belonged to a man who hadn't survived the siege, and no one had the heart to argue when she asked for it. She worked hard, learned fast, and never missed the sound of hammers echoing against steel. She even began teaching some of the town boys to shoe horses and repair tack, her voice steady, her eyes always watching the door. Silas sat on the porch most days, mending traps, whittling, offering advice to those who asked and silence to those who didn't. He never quite healed right, his limp deeper, his breath shorter, but he was still more alive than most men half his age. Sometimes Clara would bring him coffee and sit beside him as the sun dipped low. They didn't need to speak much anymore. What was left between them ran deeper than words. One afternoon, a rider came in from the east. He wore a wide-brimmed hat and a long coat dusted with the trail. 2 pistols rode high on his hips, and the silver star pinned to his chest gleamed like a sunrise. He dismounted slow, taking in the town with eyes that had seen too much and remembered all of it. He asked for Silas by name. Clara met him near the well. "What do you want with him?" "Not trouble," the man said. "Gratitude." She led him up the hill. Silas looked up from his chair, raised a brow, and nodded once. The marshal offered his hand. "Name's Harlan Price. Out of Abilene." "Marshal," Silas said, shaking it. "We been hunting the Grady butchers for years. Thought we'd never catch him. Turns out, all we needed was you. Silas said nothing. I just came to say thank you. Harlan continued. And to tell you, your name's been cleared. All of it. What they did to you, back then, it's in the reports now. They can't take your years, but maybe they can give back your honor. Silas looked past him, toward the forge where Clara's hammer rang clear. I got all the honor I need right here. Harlan nodded, touched his brim, and turned to go. Clara watched as he rode away, then turned back to Silas. Who was he really? One of the townsfolk asked, watching the marshal disappear into the horizon. Clara's smile was soft, sad and proud. The man who walks with thunder. That night, as dawn crawled toward the earth like a secret too big to keep, Clara and Silas sat together on the ridge. The first light spilled across the town, brushing gold across rooftops and washing clean the sins of the past. They sat in silence, side by side, scarred, whole, and unforgotten. And in the stillness, the thunder waited, quiet now, but always ready.